You wake up in the morning and for a moment, before memory floods back, there is nothing. Then consciousness returns and with it comes the weight. Not the weight of sadness exactly, not depression in the clinical sense, but something else entirely. The weight of seeing. You know what the day will require of you. The performance at work, the small talk that goes nowhere, the pretending that any of it matters in the way everyone seems to believe it matters. You can see the scripts you will follow, the roles you will play, the meaningless transactions dressed up as meaningful connection. And the weight of this seeing, this terrible lucidity, makes lifting your body from the bed feel like an act of violence against your own clarity. You have not lost the will to live exactly. You have lost the will to participate in the theater. And here is what no one tells you about consciousness, about really seeing. It does not set you free. It pins you to your mattress with the gravity of its honesty. They told you awareness was the goal. Wake up, see clearly, understand the truth of things. But what they did not tell you was what happens when you actually do it, when the veil lifts and you can no longer unsee what you have seen. You look at your morning routine and see it for what it is, an elaborate ritual to prepare yourself for more rituals, none of which have meaning beyond the meaning we collectively agree to pretend they have. You see your colleagues performing enthusiasm for projects that serve no genuine human need. You see your friends maintaining relationships out of habit rather than authentic connection. You see yourself going through motions that once felt natural, but now feel like you are a puppet, and you can see the strings and you cannot stop seeing them. This is not cynicism. This is not bitterness. This is lucidity. And lucidity, it turns out, has a price no one mentioned in all those books about awakening and consciousness and seeing the truth. Hannah Arendt understood something crucial about the human condition that we have largely forgotten in our celebration of consciousness and awareness. She distinguished between the vita activa and the vita contemplativa, between the life of action and the life of thought. And she knew, perhaps better than anyone, that these two modes of existence are not easily reconciled. The person who truly thinks, who truly sees, finds themselves in a paradoxical relationship with the world of action. Because to think deeply is to step outside the immediate flow of life, to create distance between yourself and the busyness that carries most people through their days. And once you have stepped outside, once you have created that distance and gained that perspective, returning to the flow becomes almost impossible. Not because you are depressed, not because something is wrong with you, but because you can see what you are returning to. This is what is happening to you in the morning when you cannot get up. Your consciousness has become so acute that you can see the gap between what life requires and what actually matters. You can see that most of what you will do today serves functions that are social, economic, performative, but not genuinely human. You will smile when you do not feel like smiling. You will express opinions you do not hold to maintain relationships. You will engage in transactions that feel empty of real meaning. You will perform a version of yourself that is acceptable to others, but feels alien to the clarity you have gained. And your lucidity shows you all of this before you have even left your bed. The will to participate drains away because participation now feels like betraying what you know to be true. Arendt wrote about thoughtlessness as one of the great dangers of modern life. The way people can commit terrible acts by simply not thinking, by following scripts and obeying orders without reflection. But what she also understood, though she explored it differently, is that thinking itself can become its own kind of danger, not to others, but to the thinker, because thinking creates a space, a gap, between you and the world. When you think deeply about what you are doing, when you really examine your actions and motivations and the systems you are embedded in, you cannot help but see the arbitrariness, the constructedness, the fundamental emptiness of much of what passes for meaningful life. And once you see it, you cannot simply unsee it and return to innocent participation. The person who has not yet achieved lucidity moves through life with a kind of momentum. They do things because things are done. They believe in the importance of their work because everyone agrees to believe in its importance. They find meaning in conventions because they have not yet questioned where those conventions came from or what purposes they serve. They can get up in the morning without conscious effort because they have not yet created the distance that makes getting up a choice requiring justification. They are carried along by the flow. But you You have stepped out of the flow. You have seen it from the outside. And now every act of participation requires you to consciously choose to step back into something you know, at some level, is a kind of shared hallucination. If this is resonating with something you have been feeling but have not been able to name, consider subscribing. I explore these territories of consciousness and its consequences every week, and I would be honored to have you along for this journey of understanding. This is not about depression, though it can look like depression to those who do not understand it. Depression often involves a collapse of meaning across the board, a flattening of affect, an inability to feel anything as mattering. What you are experiencing is different. You can still see what matters. In fact, you see it too clearly. You can see that genuine connection matters, that love matters, that beauty matters, that truth matters. The problem is that most of what your day requires has nothing to do with these things that actually matter. You are being asked to spend your energy and attention on things your lucidity has revealed as hollow. And this creates a kind of split, a fracture between what you know and what you must do. The will to get up is the will to bridge that fracture, to somehow inhabit both the truth you see and the performance that life requires. And some mornings, the gap is simply too wide. Arendt's concept of plurality is useful here. She argued that human beings are fundamentally plural, that we exist not as isolated consciousnesses, but as beings who appear to one another, who create meaning together through action and speech. The public realm, the space where we appear to others and act in concert, is essential to human life. We are not meant to live entirely in our own heads. But here is the tension. To participate in that public realm, to maintain plurality, requires a certain willing suspension of total lucidity. It requires agreeing to shared fictions. It requires treating as significant things that, under analytical scrutiny, might not hold up. It requires a kind of faith in the collective project of being human together, even when you can see all the ways that project is flawed, arbitrary, and sometimes absurd. Your lucidity has damaged your capacity for this willing suspension. You can still see that the collective project matters in some abstract sense. But in the moment, in the morning, when you need to get up and participate, you cannot access the feeling that would make participation natural. You see too clearly. You see the performance. You see the arbitrariness. You see how much energy is required to maintain fictions you no longer believe in. And your body, your will, refuses. Not out of weakness, out of a kind of clarity-induced exhaustion. I know many of you watching this have never told anyone what you are really experiencing. You have been carrying this alone, maybe for years, thinking something is fundamentally wrong with you. But here is what I want you to understand. The moment you name this, the moment you acknowledge it out loud, even just in a comment, something shifts. You stop being alone with it. So let me ask you directly, when did this lucidity start making everything feel impossible? When did seeing clearly become heavier than ignorance? I want you to share in the comments, not because I need engagement, but because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not the only one. And if you cannot find the words right now, if it feels too heavy to articulate, just type this: I see too much. That is it. Just those 4 words. Because when you do, you create permission for dozens of others to say it too. Your honesty, your willingness to be seen in your struggle, it helps break the silence that keeps all of us isolated. So comment below. Tell me where you are in this. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone in what you are feeling. What you are experiencing has a structure. Understanding that structure does not make it go away, but it does make it less mystifying, less like personal failure. The structure works like this. Consciousness creates distance. Distance creates perspective. Perspective reveals arbitrariness. Arbitrariness drains motivation, and drained motivation makes action feel impossible. Each step follows logically from the previous one. You are not broken. You are experiencing the natural consequence of a particular kind of seeing. This is important to understand because it means this is not something to fix, not in the conventional sense. You cannot think your way back to innocent participation. You cannot unsee what you have seen. The question is not how to undo your lucidity, but how to exist with it, how to find a way to act in a world whose fictions you can no longer fully believe in. Arendt spent much of her work exploring totalitarianism and how ordinary people become complicit in evil through thoughtlessness. But she also understood that the opposite problem exists, that excessive thinking can isolate you from the human world. In her later work on thinking, willing, and judging, she explored what happens in the internal space of consciousness, the dialogue we have with ourselves. And she recognized that this internal dialogue, while crucial for moral life, for maintaining the capacity to distinguish right from wrong, also separates us from others. When you are deeply engaged in thinking, you are not present in the world of action. You are somewhere else in the space of thought. And the more time you spend in that space, the harder it becomes to fully inhabit the space of action, appearance, and plurality. This is your situation. You have developed such a strong capacity for thinking, for reflecting, for seeing, that the space of thought has become more real to you than the space of action. You can see through the action before you take it. You can see its motivations, its consequences, its essential arbitrariness. And this seeing drains the action of its power to carry you forward. You are living too much in the vita contemplativa and not enough in the vita activa. But here is the crucial point. You cannot simply will yourself back into action. You cannot pretend you do not see what you see. The way forward is not through less consciousness, but through a different relationship with your consciousness. Think about what happens when you do manage to get up on some mornings. What allows it? Usually it is not that you have convinced yourself the day matters. It is that you have found some small thing, some minor action that does not require you to betray your lucidity. Maybe you get up to make coffee, and for that moment, the act of making coffee is sufficient unto itself. It does not pretend to be more than it is. Or maybe you get up because someone you love needs something, and in that moment, the love is real enough to bridge the gap between seeing and acting. These small moments teach you something important. You can act without fully believing in the grand narratives that usually justify action. You can move through the world in a more minimal way, taking each action for what it is, rather than for what it symbolizes or leads to. This is not resignation exactly. It is more like what Arendt would call natality, the capacity for new beginnings. Each moment you get up, each action you take despite your lucidity, is a kind of new beginning. It is not based on restoring your faith in the system. It is based on something smaller and more immediate, the capacity to begin again, to act even without grand justification, even without believing the action will lead somewhere meaningful. This sounds bleak, but it is actually more honest than the motivated enthusiasm you see in people who have not yet developed your capacity to see. They act from habit and social pressure and unexamined belief. You must act from something else, something more conscious and chosen. Your lucidity is showing you that most meaning is constructed, agreed upon, social. But this does not mean no meaning is possible. It means you have to find meaning in a different register, not in the grand narratives of career success or social status or conventional achievements, not in the shared fictions that carry others along, but in smaller, more immediate forms of meaning. The meaning of this specific conversation, the meaning of this particular cup of coffee, the meaning of being present for this person in this moment. These small meanings do not require you to pretend. They do not require you to believe in more than they are. They can coexist with your lucidity because they are modest in their claims. Arendt wrote about the banality of evil, the way great harm can come from thoughtless adherence to systems and roles. But there is also something we might call the banality of living, the way most of life is actually made up of small, ordinary, seemingly insignificant actions. And perhaps what your lucidity needs is not grand justification for these actions, but permission to find them sufficient as they are. You do not need to believe your job is saving the world. You need to be able to show up and do the work without that belief crushing you. You do not need to believe every social interaction is deeply meaningful. You need to be able to engage without feeling like a fraud for engaging. The exhaustion you feel is the exhaustion of trying to bridge the gap between what you see and what you do. You see the emptiness, and yet you must act in the world of forms and conventions. This requires a constant translation, a constant negotiation between your inner clarity and your outer performance. And yes, this is exhausting. Yes, there are mornings when it feels like too much. Yes, there are days when staying in bed feels like the only honest choice. But here is what I need you to understand. The exhaustion itself is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are doing something difficult. Living with lucidity is difficult. It is more difficult than living in unconscious momentum. And you are doing that difficult thing. There is a kind of courage in your inability to get up. Strange as that sounds. It is the courage of refusing to pretend. The courage of not being able to fake enthusiasm for what you know is hollow. Many people spend their entire lives never accessing this level of honesty with themselves. They push through. They perform. They never stop to ask whether any of it is real. You cannot do that anymore. You have lost that capacity. But in losing it, you have gained something else, the capacity for radical honesty with yourself. The question is what to do with that honesty now that you have it. What you are discovering is that honesty and action do not always align. Sometimes honesty requires inaction. Sometimes the most honest thing is to stay in bed and admit you cannot pretend today. But sometimes honesty requires action even in the absence of grand meaning. Sometimes the honest thing is to get up and make coffee, not because it matters in some cosmic sense, but because it is what is here to be done. This is a different kind of action than the motivated action of people who believe fully in what they are doing. It is action as acknowledgement of being alive, action as a minimal affirmation of existence, action without the weight of meaning we usually load onto it. You are learning to act without believing, which is one of the hardest things a conscious human being can do. Every system around you tells you that belief should precede action, that you need to be motivated, inspired, convinced of the importance of what you are doing. But your lucidity has shown you that this model does not work for you anymore. You cannot manufacture belief. You cannot unsee what you have seen, so you are being forced to find a different ground for action. Not belief, not faith in the system, not conviction that it all matters. Something else. Something smaller and more immediate. The bare fact of your existence. The next moment requiring the next action. The person in front of you needing something you can give. The coffee that wants to be made. The day that is here whether you believe in it or not. If what I am sharing here resonates with something you have been feeling, something you have not quite been able to name, then I want you to know you are not alone in this. There are many of us exploring these questions, sitting with these uncomfortable truths, learning to see in new ways. I create these videos for people who are ready to go deeper, who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to understand rather than just feel better temporarily. If that is you, consider subscribing. Not because you need another channel to follow, but because this journey of understanding yourself, of waking up to what is real, it helps to have companions along the way. People who will not offer you easy fixes, but will sit with you in the questions. I will be here every week with another exploration, another perspective, another thread to pull on, and I would be honored to have you here as part of this community of seekers and thinkers. So if this feels right, hit that subscribe button. And if you found value in this particular exploration, let me know in the comments what resonated most with you. Your reflections often illuminate things I had not considered. Arendt also wrote about judgment, the capacity to look at particular situations and determine what is right or appropriate without relying on universal rules. This is different from thinking, which is more abstract and general. Judgment is concrete and specific. It looks at this situation, this moment, this person, and decides what to do here and now. Perhaps what you need is to cultivate this capacity for judgment, separate from your capacity for thinking. Your thinking has become so strong that it sees through everything, shows you the emptiness behind the forms. But judgment can operate differently. Judgment can say, yes, I see that this is ultimately arbitrary, that this convention has no cosmic significance, that this action does not matter in the grand scheme. And yet, in this moment, with this person, doing this thing is what is appropriate. Not because it matters eternally, but because it is what this particular situation calls for. This is not hypocrisy. This is not betraying your lucidity. This is adding another capacity to it, the capacity to act in the world as it is, rather than only seeing the world as it truly is. You can hold both. You can see through the performance and still perform. You can recognize the arbitrariness and still choose this particular arbitrary thing. You can know it does not matter ultimately and still decide it matters here, now, in this limited context. This is what Arendt meant by plurality, by the capacity to appear to others and act in concert despite never being able to fully know or control the consequences of your actions. You act not from certainty but from something else, from responsiveness to the moment, from acknowledgement of your connection to others, from the bare fact that you are alive and therefore must do something with that aliveness. The morning when you cannot get up is the morning when your thinking has overwhelmed your capacity for judgment and action. You are so absorbed in seeing the truth that you cannot move within the world of appearances. But the world of appearances is where you live. That is where your body is, where other people are, where coffee and sunlight and the next moment exist. You cannot live entirely in the space of thought. You are not built for that. Human beings need both the vita contemplativa and the vita activa. You need to think and you need to act, you need to see clearly, and you need to participate. And the challenge of your life right now is learning to do both at once, to hold your lucidity while still engaging with the world that lucidity has shown you to be less real than you once thought. This means accepting that you will spend much of your life doing things that do not feel fully authentic to your deepest understanding. You will engage in conversations you see as superficial. You will do work you know is not ultimately important. You will maintain relationships that feel partly performative. And yes, this creates a split, a kind of internal division. But perhaps the goal is not to eliminate that division, but to become more comfortable inhabiting it, to recognize that all conscious humans live in multiple registers at once, and that this multiplicity is not a sign of failure, but a sign of complexity. You can see through things and still engage with them. You can recognize emptiness and still find small satisfactions. You can hold despair about the human condition and still love particular humans. What your lucidity has cost you is innocence, the ability to move through life without questioning, to do things simply because things are done. But what it has given you is responsibility, the capacity to choose how you engage, despite knowing that engagement is always partly a performance. You are more free than you realize, more free than the people who move through life on autopilot. But freedom, as Arendt understood better than almost anyone, is a burden. Freedom means you must choose. You must decide each morning whether to get up. You must determine each moment whether to participate or withdraw. You must constantly navigate between your inner clarity and your outer presentation. This is exhausting. This is why you are tired. Not because you are weak, but because you are free, and freedom is work. Perhaps the question is not how to restore your will to get up, but how to develop a different relationship with getting up. Not as something you do because you believe in where it leads, but as something you do because it is the next action in the sequence of actions that constitutes your life. You get up, not because it matters in some grand sense, but because getting up is what one does when one is alive and morning has come. You participate not because you believe in the system, but because participation is one of the ways humans exist with other humans. You engage not because it is meaningful in itself, but because engagement is preferable to total isolation, because even performance can sometimes lead to genuine moments, because you do not actually know in advance which actions will turn out to matter and which will not. Your lucidity wants certainty before action. It wants to know that what you do matters before it will let you do it. But life does not work that way. Meaning emerges from action, it does not precede it. You cannot know in advance what will turn out to be significant. You must act first in uncertainty, and sometimes meaning follows. This is what Arendt meant when she wrote about action being unpredictable, about how we can never fully control the consequences of what we do. We act into a world we do not fully understand, and things happen that we could not have anticipated. This is terrifying to the lucid mind that wants to see everything clearly before committing. But it is also liberating. It means you do not need total clarity before you act. You can act from partial knowledge, from limited understanding, from the bare minimum of just being here now, and this being what is in front of you to do. The morning you cannot get up, try this. Do not try to convince yourself the day matters. Do not reach for grand meaning or cosmic significance. Just notice the next smallest action, the turning over in bed, the placing of feet on floor, the standing, the walking to the kitchen, the filling of the kettle. Each action small enough that it does not require justification, does not demand that you believe in it, just the next thing and then the next thing. Not because they add up to something important, but because they are what is here to be done. This is action without the weight of meaning, action as pure movement through space and time. And sometimes, if you can stay with the small actions without loading them with significance, the day begins to unfold without your having to decide whether you believe in it. This is not a solution exactly. This is not a way to restore motivated enthusiasm or belief in the importance of what you do. This is something different, a way of moving through life that acknowledges your lucidity while not being paralyzed by it. You see clearly and you act anyway, not because the action is justified, but because action is what living things do. Not because it matters ultimately, but because it is what is here, now, in this moment, that you are alive in. This is a more minimal form of existence than the one you probably imagined for yourself. It is not triumphant or inspiring, it is just honest. And sometimes honesty is enough. Sometimes just being able to get up without lying to yourself about why is its own kind of victory, quiet and unremarkable, but real. Your lucidity will not go away. Once you have seen through the performance, you cannot unsee it. Once you have recognized the arbitrariness, you cannot restore the feeling that it all matters in the way you once believed. This is permanent. This is what consciousness costs. But you can learn to live with it. You can learn to act despite it. You can learn to find small meanings that do not require cosmic justification. You can learn to participate lightly, without full belief, without pretending, but also without total withdrawal. This is the narrow path between naive participation and complete paralysis. It is not an easy path. It requires constant balance, constant adjustment, constant choice. But it is a path, and you are already on it, even on the mornings when you cannot get up, because even staying in bed is a choice. Even withdrawal is a form of action. Even acknowledging that you cannot participate today is a kind of honesty that has its own integrity. You are doing the best you can with the consciousness you have. And that perhaps is all that can be asked of anyone who has learned to see clearly. The world will still be here tomorrow. The performance will still be required. But you will still be you, lucid and tired and honest. And that is something. That is enough.